Guys, thanks so much for the overwhelming response to my first video. I really appreciate it, and I'm glad that you guys are here with me along for the journey for me to kind of share with you what's happening. Let's jump into part 2. And in this part, I'm going to talk about what happens immediately following a diagnosis of a disease like breast cancer or perhaps any other seriously chronic disease. Now, there are two sides to post-diagnosis, and I'm talking like immediately post-diagnosis here. And those two sides are the clinical and the non-clinical side. Now, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to get too deeply into the clinical side. I'll share with you a few of the things a few of the exams and tests that you would probably have to experience once you start speaking with your oncologist or your surgeon or whoever is seeing about your medical care. But I definitely want to talk about what happens in that week just after you're diagnosed, in those moments, because that time is really critical for you to take time with yourself and for you to come up with a plan for your mental health, because I'm telling you, that is one of the most difficult weeks that you will face, one of the most difficult times you will face. For me, the period lasted about, I would say, about a month, until I got to the space where I could actually verbalize the word cancer without it literally bubbling up in my throat and almost choking me. But everybody has to deal with it differently. I'm going to share with you some of the things I did to manage my mental health, and also, I would say, come up with a communications plan for how and who and when people would know what exactly is happening with me. My diagnosis was confirmed on a Thursday, and I was only able to enroll in the public health sector on the Monday. The reality is, as much as I would have gone through the private sector for the diagnosis and really to do the investigation, there is availability of that in the public sector. It's just that it may take a little longer, and for me it was important. Speed was of the essence because I've been going through the investigation stage for so long. Once I got the confirmation through pink hibiscus, immediately my next step was to go and enroll in the public health sector, which is where the vast majority of people in Trinidad and Tobago will receive their care. Not every single person, but the majority of us, whether it's partially, totally, or just a little bit. And I was only able to get in there on the Monday. So I had to spend the next few days pretty much coming to terms with what is going on, the Thursday, the Friday, the Saturday, the Sunday, and before I could get into the clinic on the Monday. Here's what happened in that time and how I decided how I would treat with things. Essentially what my communications plan was going to be from that point on. First thing I did was come home and pretty much cry my eyes out, which is what many people will do. In fact, I expect that to be part of the catharsis of knowing probably the feeling of the pain and finally having an explanation as to what may have been going on with you, particularly if you're somebody where it wasn't so straightforward to come up with the answer for what was wrong. And once you have gotten to the point where you basically cried your eyes out, you have gotten that initial stress off of your chest, here are the things that I decided that I would do and how I would determine who is important. Now, my mother has always been my number one soldier in this war. She is like my army general. She is like my core strategist. She's been here before. She understands what's going on, and she was somebody I could rely on and still rely on to this day to do the emotional labor with me. And those are the first types of people that you want to include. The people who are willing to do the emotional labor with you. There are very few people, I can count them on one hand, the people who I trusted to do the emotional labor with me. Those were people in my immediate family. And those are the ones who, when I needed certain things fast-tracked or I needed help with something, they were the ones who I can rely on. I'm sure there are some family members looking at this video right now thinking, what? I didn't know. And the truth is, it wasn't your time to know. It wasn't your time to know because you didn't serve a purpose at that time. And this is not to be offensive, but that's the way it is. And it is important for those of us who may be going through this to not feel guilty about that. Not feel guilty about not including people, because sometimes people tend to make your illness about them. Sometimes people tend to make it about, why didn't you tell me? How come I didn't know? And the truth is that you didn't need to know at that time. What would you have done? I couldn't even articulate what was going on. I couldn't even tell you. What would I say to you? The first thing you need to do is decide who are your top line people, the people who are willing to do the emotional labor with you, the people who are going to need the distance, the people who are going to spend the hours with you at the hospital, the ones picking you up, dropping you off, bringing you lunch, praying with you. Those are the people you want in your circle first. The second thing I did was putting a gag order on my family, a serious gag order. They were to tell no one, absolutely no one. It was important for me to protect the way I wanted this to be communicated, and I needed to figure out what that was, how that was, because in these early stages there are lots of unanswered questions, and the worst thing that, for me personally, the worst thing that I could experience would have been people speaking without knowledge. I didn't have knowledge. I couldn't yet give it to them. How will they have the knowledge to speak? As I said, cancer is a very different thing to different people. It's very difficult for people to just take things generically and just put it out there. Put a gag order on them until I was ready. They were to say nothing to anyone. And I knew because they're the ones doing the emotional labor, I could trust them to say nothing. Added to that, I told nobody outside my immediate family. And it was important for me to spend that time. Even my close friends were on the outside for a bit because I needed to understand what I was dealing with, the depth and breadth of this rare diagnosis. What did it mean? How would it affect me long term? What are my chances of survival? All of these things are questions people immediately want to know. How far has it gotten? What stage you're at? What grade you're at? These are all questions people may want to ask, but at that stage, none of those things we know. We have no idea. And sometimes we just need the time. So I made a decision to speak no words, to just say nothing. And sometimes being quiet is what you need to be in order for you to gather your thoughts and for you to decide, how am I going to communicate this to those who need to know. The next thing I did is I worked out exactly what I would say if I had to say something. Right. So by the time I spoke to my doctors and I was able to get into see the oncologist, enroll in the clinic, at that point I had to come up with what would be said, who it would be said to, if anything would be said, and made the decision or laid the criteria for what was the qualifying thing for people to know. If people looked at me, they probably would not know, to be honest. And at this point, people still probably wouldn't know. And I had said something, they might have noticed my hair is gone, but that could be for any number of reasons. This is not the first time in my life I've had no hair. That was really important for me to do. The next thing I did is that I decided to stay off of social media. I was present, I was seeing, but I had nothing to say at the time. My focus was me. I had nothing to contribute to social media at this time. I needed my time for me. And that meant leaving all groups, leaving anything that demanded anything more than I was willing to give at the time. Perhaps you might want to do that too. If you're somebody who is very, very present in a lot of social circles, sometimes you just need to withdraw and take that time for yourself. That's really important. And another big thing that I did, and I still do, is I avoid people who give me unsolicited health advice. It's okay, guys, I've been good up to this point. Because people always want to tell you, drink this, eat that, do this, and they've never actually walked this road before. It really could be overwhelming, frustrating, annoying when you have a whole bunch of people just kind of in your face telling you, trying to give you advice, and you're like, well, I didn't ask for this advice. Again, I just need my thoughts. Even in going to the clinic, sometimes you may sit next to people who like to talk a lot, they're very chatty. But for me personally, I need my quiet time, and you could deal with things the way you want to deal with them. Some people need quiet time. I need quiet time because I'm always processing, thinking what's next, what's going to be happening, how am I going to manage my next step. For some people that's important. For me it was important. But if you like super chatty and you want to do that, do that. You have to kind of determine what works for you so that you can manage your own mental health and you can feel a sense of control, because it's very overwhelming to feel out of control. You don't know what's happening, you don't know what's going on, and you just want to feel some measure of control in your own life again. You have to determine what your communication plan will be, who would be involved, what would they say, even if it means you assigning one person to take on queries if that is necessary, because I did that at one point. You just have to do what you have to do to manage the narrative, because the truth is there are some people who who will hear this thing and they will not protect you. They will not keep it private. What it will be is it will be fodder at their gossip table to say, you didn't hear about so-and-so, you didn't hear about so-and-so. They are not the ones who are going to reach out and say, how can I support you? What do you need? Are you financially stable? Do you need lunch? Do you need... They wouldn't ask that. All they will do is say, I heard so-and-so, and they will take it back to their gossip circles. It's really important for you to protect yourself, and the only way for you to do that is to come up with a method and a way of communicating and I know it sounds corporate, I can't help myself, but you have to do that to protect yourself. It is very, very critical. When it comes to the clinical side of your care, particularly in Trinidad and Tobago, and I want to be specific here because there is a dearth of information locally in terms of people knowing what to do first, what to do second, where to go. That space really is empty, and I know that because I had to experience it. In a Google search throws up lots of information for the United States, for the UK, Canada, and I am in groups with lots of very brave, strong women from different parts of the world, but locally it's quite empty. So let's talk about what happens. At least I will share from my perspective what happens when you transition from your private care into the public sector, which is where most of us will receive care. So the first thing you'd want to do is take all of your medical records, whether you would have gotten scans, particularly any confirmed diagnosis, because the public health sector will not treat you until they have a confirmation of diagnosis. You take all of that and you go get an appointment at the breast clinic at the St. James Medical Complex, right? So that will be the National Cancer Center, also known as the National Radiotherapy Center. You want to go down there, see if you get an appointment, right, as soon as possible. Once you get an appointment and you go see the team down there, they're going to recommend for you a battery of tests if you haven't gotten those tests before. And these are what those tests look like for me. More than likely, you will have most of the same tests. You may have different ones depending on the type of cancer, type of breast cancer you've been diagnosed with, depending on your age, depending on lots of different things. But let me just give you some of the basic ones. So one of the first tests you're going to be recommended to do, if you haven't done it before, is a CT scan. And this is where they pretty much look deeply into your body to see what is going on. So your breast diagnosis would have been enough for them to see what's happening at the site. But because cancer is it could be such a treacherous thing, you know, it could spread, it can go to places. So they tend to do a CT scan at least from your neck all the way down through your pelvis. And this is when it comes specifically to breast cancer, to see just how far the cancerous cells may have grown. They may have grown into your armpits, they may have grown into your chest, they may have affected your liver, your lungs, you just don't know. So it may have affected your bones, you don't know. So it's important for the doctors to see just how far so they can understand what exactly they are dealing with. Because this is a very critical part in mapping your oncological treatment, so that they can say, oh, we see it here, or it's confined to this area. And that also gives them a sense of what stage you're at. So your CT scan is going to be one of the first things you're going to need to get. The reality is, if you have comorbidities, or if you are unfit or your body's in a compromised state, it is going to be more difficult to treat you. Which is why going through this journey has been such a massive revolution in terms of health for me, and it will be for a lot of people, which is something I will kind of get into in videos later down the line. But they're going to need to check your blood to see where your blood count is at, to see your creatinine levels, to see your kidney function, because all of these things affect how they will administer the treatment to you and what exactly your body could take at the time of the diagnosis. The next thing they're going to make you do, which you could actually do right at the hospital right there, because there's always a phlebotomist there, is your blood work. They probably do this to check your blood count to see where you are at, to see how fit you are for treatment, because the reality is, if you have comorbidities, or if you are unfit or your body's in a compromised state, it is going to be more difficult to treat you. Which is why going through this journey has been such a massive revolution in terms of health for me, and it will be for a lot of people, which is something I will kind of get into in videos later down the line. But they're going to need to check your blood to see where your blood count is at, to see your creatinine levels, to see your kidney function, because all of these things affect how they will administer the treatment to you and what exactly your body could take at the time of the diagnosis. Another test you might get, this is one specific to me because of the type of medication I was put on. You're going to need to get an echocardiogram, which is a heart check, because some of these medications that you will receive will probably affect your heart, or it could affect your heart. It's not guaranteed, right? But again, if your body is in good condition and you are at a particular place, your organs can withstand the real jamming of what chemotherapy is, or if you're doing immunotherapy or whatever surgery. So they do check your heart. For my heart was good and continues to be good, thank God. But they need to know what the baseline is, so that when they start to administer the medication, they will know, hey, there's been a change. We need to probably change the way we are administering this treatment. So the echocardiogram is your next test if you need it. So another test you are probably going to need to get, that again is specific to breast cancer, is something called an immunohistochemistry. Now, as I said, cancer is a very multi-layered, it's a very technical type of disease, and only when you really start to dive deeply into it, you see just how multifaceted it is. So the immunohistochemistry is a test to help you understand what receptors drive your cancer. And by receptors, if I could just make it simple, if you think of your cell, and this is the example that they use, if you think of a cancer cell like a house, and the receptors are like the locks on the house that's keeping it protected, and so nobody could penetrate it. But once you figure out what those locks are, which are the receptors, you can then design keys to open it, go in and break it down. So your receptors are like locks and the medication will be like the keys. But in order for us to understand what those receptors are, you need to get a test called an immunohistochemistry. In general, those receptors tend to be three things, tend to be three different hormones. One, estrogen, the second one is progesterone, and a third one called HER2. Some people have all these receptors, some people have two of these receptors, some people have one, some people have none. For every scenario, there's a different approach. I have all three. So my oncological plan took that into consideration. Yours might too, depending on what your receptors are. That is what it is. Now, the immunohistochemistry that I did, I was able to get two of those receptors figured out. The third receptor had to be figured out by another test called a FISH test, which is something that was available through the public sector. So you don't worry, you don't have to pay for it out of your pocket, because it can only be done overseas. It's not available locally. And the final test I did at the time, which was very important, not just for me, but for me to understand the entire health profile of my family, is genetic testing. Now, the vast majority of cancers are caused by environmental factors, whether it's lifestyle, diet, other things in the environment. But then there's a small percentage, just about 10% of people who will develop cancer based on genetic mutations. Unfortunately, I am in that category of people who have a genetic mutation. But I would have never known this if I didn't have a genetic test. It meant that other members of my family had to test, which was really important. Fortunately, most of us don't have it. But you know what? I did. I just drew that straw in life. It is what it is, right? But now that I know and I am aware, it means that I could take the approach to treating with any potential outcomes or any potential cropping up of this disease in different ways. But that's a whole other story. I'm not going to get into that right now. The bottom line is genetic testing is really important. And if you are somebody who is below the age of, let's say, 40 or 50 even, and you have been diagnosed, genetic testing is critical in your care, and it can really make a huge difference in the way your oncological plan is set out. So those are the tests that you're probably going to do for a woman who has breast cancer, and those are the tests that I did. I'm sure that there may be other tests that other people may have to do depending on what their profile was, but those are some of the things that you can expect in terms of the clinical care, at least at the first stage when you go in. Once you get the results for these tests and you take them back to your oncologist, they will then map your treatment plan based on the outcomes of these tests. Now, most of these tests are available in the public sector, but as I said, for me it was important to put some speed on it, so I would have taken my money and invested in these tests, like the CT scan and the echocardiogram and the blood, well, not the blood work, the blood work was free, that was almost immediate, and other tests in order to ensure I got things done quickly, because I needed things to be sped up. You know, when you're in that scenario, you want things to start moving fast, you want treatment to start moving fast. It's a race against time. People always talk about early detection, so it's a race between you and the enemy. It's like you're on the battle line, and it's who can get to the end first, and you always want to be in front. Okay, that is what I did. So those are the top line factors, or those are the top line tests in terms of your first set of interactions and engagement with your oncological team. And I don't want to get too deeply into the clinical part because for everybody it's different, but in my videos coming up I will talk a little bit about the lifestyle and what changes you could really make and what control you can have in your life to help support and help, you know, add to the care that you will be getting from your medical team, because it's not just about the medicine alone. It really is about a complete change in the way that you live, in the way that you are, in the way that you carry on, and giving yourself the best chance of not just survival but of as many years as possible, and happiness and peace. Okay guys, so I'll see you in the next one.